Hi, my name is Amelia,
And my name is Julia.
and we are final year speech pathology students from the University of Sydney. The topic we will be presenting today is about supporting students' development of sentence structure across the primary school years to develop the complexity of verbal and written expression. Firstly, we would like to acknowledge the tradition of custodianship and law of the country on which the University of Sydney campuses stand. We pay our respects to those who have cared and continue to care for country. Today, we are going to cover many ideas about how to support your students with their language expression throughout their schooling. We will begin with an overview of why sentence development is important and the impact of poor sentence development. We will then explain various developing components of language to look out for within written and verbal expression through academic progression. This will also include incorrect sentence construction issues and how to correct this. We will also explore different ways and strategies you can utilize to support students with a developmental language disorder or learning disability where their verbal or written expression is not within expectation. So why is sentence structure development important? The ability to develop well-structured sentences is important so that students can be effective communicators and express their thoughts in a meaningful way. Use of accurate grammar is an essential element when building sentences so that messages can be clearly understood. This incorporates the use of different word structures so that words make sense in a sentence. For example, accurate use of plurals and tense, putting words in the correct order to form coherent sentences, for example, saying I play games instead of games I play. And in written communication, accurate use of punctuation, such as full stops and commas. These elements combine to help students create meaning in their expression. As these skills develop, students can increase the length and depth of their sentences to convey more complex ideas. If a student has difficulty building sentences, they may rely on simpler sentence structures and be limited in their ability to truly reflect their ideas. It may also result in communication breakdowns where the message is misunderstood by the communication partner. These difficulties can be seen in both verbal and written communication. This can have complex implications in the classroom and limit a student's ability to achieve academic success.
This next section will be an overview of the expected level of sentence development in a student's speech and writing during different stages in primary school. Before we start, we need to look at the basics of a sentence, including the definition of independent and dependent clauses. An independent clause contains a subject, a verb, and a complete thought. For example, I wrote my first book last year. The subject is I, the verb is wrote, and it contains a complete thought. A dependent clause contains a subject and a verb. However, it's not a complete thought, so it does not make sense on its own as a sentence. For example, because she was hungry. The subject is she, the verb is was. However, it's not a complete thought or sentence. Dependent clauses are generally used to add more information to a sentence. With this information, we can delve deeper into expectations at each schooling stage. We have looked at both the New South Wales NESA syllabus and the Australian curriculum to create a guide as to where students should begin to use certain sentence types. So starting at early stage 1 or kindergarten, in their verbal expression or when talking, students should use short phrases and simple sentences when speaking. They should use simple connective words or conjunctions such as and, but, and because when speaking to link their ideas. In their writing, students should be able to write a simple sentence with correct sentence structure, including subject, verb, object, which is called SVO, to convey an idea. They should use prepositional phrases to indicate a time or place. For example, my mummy reads books at bedtime. Or the cat is walking on the roof. This is called an SVOA sentence, or subject, verb, object, and adverbial phrase. Students should also experiment with writing compound sentences and recognize that each clause within a sentence makes meaning by itself. So what is the exact definition of simple and compound sentences? A simple sentence has one independent clause. So to recap from before, this includes a subject and a verb and is a complete thought or sentence. For example, a simple sentence is, Harry is washing his hands. And with an added prepositional phrase, Harry is washing his hands in the bathroom. When writing, there are no commas used to separate any element of the sentence. A compound sentence is a sentence containing two independent clauses joined by a coordinating conjunction or a conjunctive adverb, such as however or therefore. When writing compound sentences, commas can sometimes be used before a conjunction. Examples of compound sentences include Harry reads novels, but Louis watches movies, or Harry reads novels, however, Louis watches movies. So we can remember the different coordinating conjunctions using the Fanboys acronym, and this stands for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. This slide is a good resource that explains the definitions and correct use of each coordinating conjunction with an example sentence. For example, for takes the meaning of because in a sentence, i.e., Sam drank some water for he was thirsty. You can see the other conjunctions below with example sentences. So let's move on to stage 1, or years 1 and 2 at school. In their verbal expression, students should incorporate extended sentences, including simple, compound, and complex sentences in their dialogue. In their writing, students should be able to write compound sentences using coordinating conjunctions, experiment with writing complex sentences, and use commas to separate ideas, lists, or dependent clauses in a sentence. So what about the definition of a complex sentence? A complex sentence is a sentence combining an independent clause with one or more dependent clauses. The dependent clause, which is also known as the subordinate clause of the sentence, is used to elaborate or modify the message of the independent clause, which can also be called the main clause. This adds length and complexity to the sentence and verbal expression as a whole. A complex sentence always has subordinating conjunction or a relative pronoun, for example, that, which, who, to link the parts of the sentence together. When writing complex sentences, sometimes a comma can be used to separate clauses. Examples of complex sentences include, I took my cat to the vet because she was feeling sick, and although it was hard work, I enjoyed volunteering at the library. Notice how the independent clause is further explained or elaborated upon by the dependent clause. We can remember the 10 main subordinating conjunctions using the acronym I saw a wabub, and these stand for if, since, as, when, although, while, after, before, until, and because. A wabub, being described as a rare monster, can be a fun way for students to remember the acronym. Here's an example of using the subordinating conjunction as in a sentence correctly. Whales give birth to live young as they are mammals. Subordinating conjunctions can also be used as the first word in a sentence by flipping the independent and dependent clauses, and this would be, as they are mammals, whales give birth to live young. However, when the dependent clause comes before the independent clause, a comma must be used to mark where the dependent clause ends, as seen on the slide. An example of the subordinating conjunction when used in a sentence could be, the eager students sped into school when the bell rang. When the clauses are flipped, this would become, when the bell rang, the students sped into school. An example of the subordinating conjunction because used in a sentence could be, the rugby team lost the game because they hadn't trained. And when the clauses are flipped, this would become, because they hadn't trained, the rugby team lost the game. So moving into stage 2 or years 3 and 4 at school. Generally, students at this stage should be building on their use of complex sentences. They should understand how to elaborate on ideas in text through the use of prepositional phrases. They should understand how adverbial phrases and prepositional phrases work in different ways to provide circumstantial details about an activity. For example, in the sentence, at midnight, he rose slowly from the chair and went upstairs. Adverbial phrases of time, manner, and place are used here to provide further information and detail about the action. They should also understand the meaning of sentences and that they can be enriched and complexified through the use of noun phrases, verb phrases, and prepositional phrases. For example, the addition of noun phrases can create richer, more specific descriptions in various texts. For example, in narrative texts, their very old Siamese cat, and in reports, its extremely high mountain ranges. By years 3 and 4, students should also begin extending the range of their sentences with the use of embedded clauses. So let's look further into embedded clauses now. An embedded clause involves a complex sentence where the dependent clause is embedded in the middle of another independent clause to give more information about the sentence. This dependent clause relies on the independent clause and doesn't make sense in isolation. Embedded dependent clauses are separated from the main sentence with punctuation on either side of the clause. So this could be commas, dashes, or brackets. For example, the crocodile who had been lurking underwater pounced towards its prey. The embedded clause, who had been lurking underwater, gives more information about the independent clause of the sentence. So in stage 3, or the upper primary years of year 5 and 6, students should be solidifying knowledge and correct use of more complex language. They should understand the difference between independent and dependent or subordinate clauses, and that a complex sentence involves at least one dependent or subordinate clause. They should know that the function of a complex sentence is to make connection between ideas. For example, to provide a reason, and an example of this would be, he jumped up because the bell rang. To state a purpose, for example, she raced home in order to confront her brother. To express a condition, for example, it will break if you push it. And to link two ideas in terms of various time relations. For example, Harold drew whilst Carlos painted. Students should also understand and consolidate the use of commas to separate clauses. So I'll leave this slide up for a few seconds so that you can have a better read of it now. Okay, feel free to pause it if you haven't finished reading it. So this has been a brief overview of the expectations of students' development of sentence structure throughout the stages of primary school. Amelia will now go through some common errors seen in sentence structure and ways to remediate this.
So there are two common errors that you may see in a student's written expression that do not follow the rules required to create well-structured and complete sentences. These are run-on sentences and sentence fragments. The first error you may see are run-on sentences. A run-on sentence occurs when two or more independent clauses are incorrectly connected in a student's written expression. For example, I love my dog, I would play with my dog all day if I could. These are actually two complete sentences. I love my dog, and I would play with my dog all day if I could. Note that there was a lack of punctuation or conjunction to connect these two complete sentences. There are a few ways to correct run-on sentences in students' written expression. An easy way to remediate this is to add a full stop to create two shorter sentences. For example, I love my dog, full stop, I would play with my dog all day if I could. However, this may result in students relying on short, simpler sentence structures in their written expression. Alternatively, a semicolon could be used to separate the sentence structure, the two clauses. A comma would not be sufficient to separate these two clauses, but a semicolon is appropriate to create a grammatically correct sentence and establish the relationship between the two clauses. There are also two ways to remediate run-on sentences whilst also supporting the development of complexity in a student's written expression. These are using a comma and a coordinating conjunction. For example, I love my dog and I would play with my dog all day if I could. Here, the coordinating conjunction and has been used to connect the two independent clauses and create a compound sentence. The second way is using a comma and a subordinating conjunction. For example, because I love my dog, I would play with my dog all day if I could. Here, the subordinating conjunction because has been used to change an independent clause into a dependent clause and create a complex sentence. The second error you may see are sentence fragments. A sentence fragment is a sentence that is missing a key element required to form a complete sentence. This may be the subject, the verb, or the complete thought. For example, run away at the park. This sentence is missing the subject. We are left wondering who ran away at the park. The simplest way to correct sentence fragments is to identify the missing element of the sentence and include it. In this example, it was the subject or the who that was missing. The revised sentence might look like this. My dog ran away at the park. The sentence is now complete as it contains a subject, verb, and a complete thought. Some students may have more difficulty than others creating sentences and building on their complexity as they progress through school, in both their verbal and written expression. This may include students with developmental language disorder. Developmental language disorder is a learning disability that impacts approximately 1 to 2 children in every Australian classroom. Developmental language disorder can impact a student's listening, speaking, reading, and writing. We recognise that this creates a complex challenge for teachers to support students with developmental language disorder in the classroom. Given our focus on supporting sentence development for students across the primary school years, we would like to share a strategy that can be used to support students with developmental language disorder or any student who would benefit from support to build well-structured and meaningful sentences in their verbal and written expression. The strategy we would like to introduce is called colourful semantics. Colourful semantics can be used to help students build sentences in both their verbal and written expression. It supports them in many ways, such as learning how to combine words into phrases and clauses, create complete thoughts, and understand how changing word order affects meaning. Clinical evidence has reported that an explicit and theoretically motivated therapy, such as colourful semantics, can benefit a number of children who have limited expressive language skills. Colour-coded visuals are used to help students understand these elements, to create well-structured sentences. As you can see on the screen, each part of a sentence is assigned a colour. For example, the subject or the who is orange, the verb or the doing is yellow, and the what or the object of the sentence is green. The student should be familiarised with what each colour represents. You might start by only introducing the elements of a simple sentence, such as who, doing, and what, effectively creating a scaffold for a well-structured sentence. An activity might involve creating a sentence about a picture such as the one shown. To help build a sentence using colourful semantics, you would support the student to identify one element at a time. First, you might ask, who is in this picture? The student should identify the girl as the subject. Then, what is the girl doing? The girl is writing. Then, what is the girl writing? A story. The student is then prompted to blend all of the elements together, supporting them to create a complete sentence. The girl is writing a story. Once students have mastered this simple sentence structure, other elements can be introduced to help build complexity. Further information can be added, such as where or when. For example, the girl is writing a story in her room, or the girl is writing a story at night. This process helps students to organise their sentences and can be used to build endless complexity through the addition of other elements such as how, when, and descriptions. There is also the opportunity to adapt the program for older grades through the use of conjunctions to create longer and more complex sentences. There are various ways that colourful semantics can be incorporated in the classroom to build on sentence structure development. As you can see on the screen, this may include using visual aids in the classroom as part of an activity for pitch descriptions or as part of a story sequencing activity. We hope that this presentation has provided further insight into the different sentence structures that students should be developing across the primary school years in both their verbal and written expression. We recognise the challenge that exists for teachers to support students who have difficulty forming well-structured and more complex sentences. We hope that the information discussed today has identified some ideas to support students to develop their expressive language skills at a sentence level.